In the time before maps were drawn, before kingdoms carved their names into stone, people spoke of a lone traveler who wandered the endless desert. His story was not written in books, nor carried by scribes, but passed from voice to voice, like a grain of sand carried by the wind. They said he appeared when the skies grew empty, when the stars dimmed or vanished behind clouds that hung heavy with dust. Villages would grow restless. Shepherds lost their bearings at night, and caravan paths twisted into confusion. Children would look up, searching for the constellations that guided their parents, and find only a hollow dark. That was when he came. He arrived quietly, never announced. Some remember seeing him approach from the horizon, a tall, cloaked figure whose outline wavered in the heat by day and in the silver haze by night. Others swore he appeared suddenly at the edge of the village, as if he had stepped from one shadow to another. Wherever he came from, his presence was unmistakable. In his hand, he carried a lantern, small, almost unremarkable at first glance. Its frame was bronze, dulled by age, the metal worn as though it had passed through centuries of hands. But within the lantern was a glow unlike fire. It was soft, steady, and shifting, as if tiny fragments of the night sky had been captured inside its glass. No smoke curled upward, no wick burned. Only that quiet radiance, calm and unhurried, spilling warmth across the sand. He asked for nothing. He spoke little. He would sit by the village well, lantern placed beside him, and through the long hours of night, the glow remained. Some villagers whispered that it hummed faintly, like the memory of a song too old to be recalled. Others swore that, when they leaned close, they could glimpse constellations moving across the lantern's glass. Like a window to the heavens, by morning, he would be gone, his footprints erased by wind, no trace of him left behind, except the sky above, renewed. Where there had been emptiness, stars now burned with impossible clarity. Travelers once again found their direction. Farmers marked their seasons. Children lifted their faces and whispered wishes into constellations as though they were friends returned. Who was he? No one agreed. Some said he was a sage who had walked the earth for centuries, gathering wisdom from the heavens. Others called him a spirit, neither man nor God, tasked with guarding the balance of night. A few believed he was a remnant of the stars themselves, fallen to earth with the duty of carrying their light wherever it grew faint. The name he was given was simple. Not prince, not priest, not king. He was called only the keeper of the desert stars, and so his story began, carried across the sands by those who felt the glow of his lantern and the return of the night sky. Asterisk, the desert has no memory of footsteps. Each grain of sand is lifted and turned by the wind, and whatever trace was left behind is carried away in silence. That was why no one could follow the keeper after he departed. He would vanish into the shifting expanse, his form blending with the horizon until he became nothing more than a shimmer in the air. But those who lived in the villages believed he always walked toward the same place, some hidden path only he could see. Travelers said that once, far from any settlement, they caught sight of him moving across the dunes at twilight. The sky above was painted in soft violet, and the desert stretched endless. Yet his steps were calm, deliberate, as though he walked on a road invisible to others. The lantern in his hand glowed faintly, and its light never wavered, even when the winds grew harsh. On nights when the moon rose thin and pale, he would climb the tallest dunes. From their crests, he could see the desert spread out in every direction, its surface rippling like the back of a great sleeping beast. Stars gathered above him, mirrored faintly in the grains below. To him, the desert and the sky were not separate, they were reflections of one another, bound in silence. Sometimes, as he walked, he paused before stones half buried in the sand. They were remnants of ancient places, ruins of walls that once held life and voices, but now stood quiet. He would rest his hand against them, and for a moment the lantern's glow would brighten. Faint shadows of constellations tracing themselves across the broken stone. Then he would move on, leaving the ruins to their slumber. It was said that the keeper spoke little, but when he did, his voice was low and steady, carrying a weight of ages. A caravan guide once claimed he heard him whisper to the lantern itself. The words were in no tongue the man understood, soft and measured, yet they seemed to rise into the night air, as though carried upward to the stars. What did he seek in his endless walk? Some believed he wandered in service to the sky, tasked with carrying its forgotten light to the edges of the earth. Others thought he was searching, always searching for a place where the lantern might finally rest. And a few whispered that the lantern was not a gift, but a burden, that he walked endlessly because the stars could never release him. But he did not falter. His steps were slow, yet unwavering. His path bent toward places no one else dared to go. Valleys where the wind howled like a chorus of lost voices. Ridges of black stone where no bird flew, and wells so deep that even an echo would not return. Still, the lantern shone, a patient companion in the darkness. The desert held no end, but neither did his journey. And wherever he passed, though no footprints remained, the stars above seemed to grow sharper, as though they leaned closer to watch him walk. Asterisk, there are places in the desert where the sand rises high, swallowing stone and memory alike. Travelers who pass these places see only broken columns, fractured statues, or the curve of a wall jutting out from the dunes like a bone revealed by time. But beneath the sand lie entire cities, once alive with voices, now silenced and hidden. It was toward one such place that the keeper's steps carried him. No caravan dared approach it. Guides spoke of winds that never ceased there, carrying fine dust that cut into the skin and stripped the air of sound. They said the place had been cursed, abandoned in haste, its people scattering to the edges of the desert long ago. Yet the keeper walked without hesitation. The lantern's glow steady against the shifting dark dot. As he reached the first half-buried gate, the ruins stirred, not with life, but with the hush of memory. The lantern's light brushed across the stone, revealing faded carvings, scenes of kings and battles, gods with outstretched hands, processions of dancers whose faces had been smoothed away by centuries of sand. Where most eyes would see only broken marks, the keeper's gaze lingered as though he could still read the language carved there. He moved deeper, past shattered arches that once guarded doorways, into courtyards drowned in silence. The wind pressed through the hollow streets, pulling grains of sand across the ground in quiet streams. The lantern illuminated fragments of stairways, toppled statues, and doorframes that led only into drifts of dust. Every stone seemed to sigh under the touch of the light, as if it remembered footsteps that had long since vanished. At the heart of the ruins stood a tower, its upper half broken, leaning like an old man too weary to stand tall. The keeper paused before it, the lantern raised. For the first time that night, its glow grew brighter, swelling until the tower's shadow stretched long and sharp across the sand. And in that glow, faint outlines appeared, not shapes of stone, but of memory. Figures moving in silence, men carrying jars of water, women weaving at doorways, children running across the square. Their bodies were no more than dust and light, yet they seemed to stir as though caught between the world that had been and the night that now held them. The keeper stood still, watching. His face was unreadable, lined with patience, his eyes fixed on the flickering shadows. Slowly, he lifted his free hand and touched the tower's surface. The lantern answered, casting a pattern of stars across the broken stone, constellations bending to meet the ruin's form. The air grew still. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. And then, as gently as they had come, the shapes of memory dissolved, returning to the silence of the ruins. The lantern dimmed to its quiet glow. The keeper lowered his hand and continued walking. He did not turn back. The tower leaned behind him, silent once more, but the stars above gleamed sharper, brighter, as though they too had remembered. Night in the desert is not empty. To those who sleep, it may seem still, but to those who wander, it holds 1,000 sounds. The hush of shifting sand, the groan of distant stone, the sigh of wind curling low through valleys. And sometimes, hidden in those currents, there are voices. The keeper moved beyond the ruined city, his lantern a soft pulse against the expanse. The dunes rose and fell like waves, endless, each one swallowing the horizon. His pace was slow, his cloak trailing across the ground, yet he walked as though guided by a rhythm older than his own breath. Above him, the stars glittered in silence, sharp and close, their light pressing against the desert floor. It was on such a night, when the moon sat thin as a blade above the horizon, that the voices began. At first, faint like threads of sound woven into the wind's song. He paused, lifting the lantern, and the glow spread across the sand. The voices grew clearer. They were not the cries of the living. They belonged to those who had once crossed these lands, merchants whose caravans had vanished in storms, wanderers who had lost their way, seekers who had followed false stars. Their words were scattered, broken, drifting, as if half forgotten even by themselves. Some called names, others recited fragments of prayers. A few only sighed, long and hollow, as though they had waited centuries to be heard. The keeper listened without fear. His lantern shone steadily, and the sound of the lost seemed to bend toward it, circling softly around him. He did not try to silence them. Instead, he stood in stillness, allowing their echoes to gather. One voice rose clearer than the rest, trembling but gentle, like the rustle of palm leaves. It spoke of water, of a well that had once stood where now there was only sand. Another whispered of stars that guided them once, only to vanish, leaving them in endless night. A third voice, faint as dust, murmured the name of a loved one again and again, until the syllables dissolved into the air. The keeper lowered his gaze, and for a moment his lantern dimmed, as though it too was listening. Then, with a small shift of his hand, he lifted it higher. The light spread wider across the desert, washing the dunes in a pale glow. The voices softened. One by one, they quieted, as though soothed, their fragments dissolving into the calm silence of the night. When the last whisper faded, the desert returned to its steady hush. The wind still moved, brushing across the sand, but it carried no more cries. The stars above seemed sharper, their constellations drawing closer, like companions leaning down to watch. The keeper walked on. His lantern glowed, and though no trace of the voices remained, the desert felt lighter, as if it, too, had been unburdened. And somewhere, far ahead, the faint line of mountains waited, their peaks touched by starlight. Asterisk, the desert stretched for many nights, yet the keeper did not falter. His pace was steady, his figure moving across the dunes like a shadow that belonged to the stars rather than the earth. For a long time, nothing changed. The sky wheeled above him. The sand shifted beneath him. The lantern's glow spread and dimmed with the rhythm of his steps. But one evening, as the first edge of night pressed against the horizon, the land rose. The flat sea of dunes gave way to ground more firm, dark ridges emerging from the sand like the bones of the earth. And beyond them, he saw what few had seen in living memory, the faint outline of mountains, their jagged peaks dusted in silver from the stars. Above, no caravan path led here. Traders spoke only of endless sand and storms. Yet the keeper walked as though he had always known this place. His lantern held steady at his side. At the base of the ridges, the desert revealed a road. Not a road of stone, nor of packed earth, but of markings carved long ago into the land. The wind had buried much of it, yet enough remained to show its shape, a winding path lined with fragments of pillars, their surfaces worn and cracked. Between them lay scattered slabs etched with symbols too old to be read. This was no trade route. It was a path of devotion. Once, long ago, people had walked here in pilgrimage, leaving their homes behind to journey toward the mountains. Some believed the peaks touched the very edge of heaven, a place where the stars bent close to earth. Others thought a temple once stood there, a sanctuary where prayers rose straight into the night sky. The keeper's lantern swept across the broken pillars, and as it did, the carvings stirred faintly. Shapes of stars shimmered across their surfaces, patterns that shifted like constellations. For a moment, it was as though the road itself remembered the feet that had once pressed upon it, the songs that had risen along its length, the hands that had carried offerings to the summit. He paused, standing still among the ruins. His eyes lifted to the peaks, jagged and silent against the horizon. No voice stirred here, no whisper of the lost, only the quiet waiting of stone and the faint pulse of memory lingering in the road. Slowly, he stepped forward. His feet pressed into the sand between the slabs, and the lantern's light spread before him, guiding the path. As he walked, the air grew cooler, touched by winds that carried the scent of stone and distance. The desert fell away behind him, and the mountains loomed closer, their shadows long and deep. The keeper walked on, each step deliberate, his lantern steady. The pilgrimage path had been abandoned for centuries, but tonight, under the watching stars, it lived again, not with crowds or songs, but with a single figure walking in silence, carrying the light of the heavens within his hand. Asterisk, The mountain path rose before him, narrow and uneven, its surface broken by time. Stones shifted underfoot, some worn smooth by centuries of passage, others jagged, newly revealed by slides of earth. Above, the peaks seemed impossibly far, their sharp edges lit by a cold shimmer of stars. The keeper stood at the threshold for a moment, his lantern casting a circle of light across the first steps. Then he began to climb. The desert fell away behind him, its vast silence stretching into shadow. The air here was different, thinner, touched by coolness, carrying with it a whisper that was neither wind nor voice, but something between. The path wound upward, pressing along ridges and curling between walls of rock. Each turn revealed more of the sky, until it seemed that the stars were not above him, but all around. Leaning close to watch his ascent, along the way, he began to see signs of those who had walked before. Small cairns of stone, stacked carefully at the edges of the path. Pieces of pottery, their surfaces cracked but still carrying faint patterns. Fragments of cloth, faded to dust, caught in crevices where the wind had pinned them for ages. These were offerings left by pilgrims who had once believed that the mountains touched eternity. He paused by one such cairn. It was small, no higher than his knee, yet within its shadow lay a bowl of bronze, half buried in sand and grit. He set the lantern beside it, and for a moment the glow revealed marks along its rim symbols that flickered like stars, shapes that no living tongue could name. His hand lingered on the edge of the cairn, steady and patient, and the light grew brighter, spilling warmth into the cracks of stone. For a moment, the air stirred, as though voices once raised in devotion still lingered there. Faint echoes of prayers carried upward. He moved on, step by step, past offerings left in silence. A carved wooden figure, its features worn smooth. A string of beads turned brittle by time. The faint outline of words scratched into rock, eroded into unreadable curves. Each one, though abandoned, seemed to stir under the lantern's gaze, remembered for a moment before falling back into stillness. The path narrowed as it climbed higher, curling along a ledge that looked out across the desert below. From this height, the sand seemed endless, an ocean frozen in waves of shadow and moonlight. The keeper paused, turning slightly, and the lantern's glow spread outward across the view. The desert answered, its stars reflected in the grains below, the horizon shimmering with a quiet light. Above, the peaks waited closer now, yet still veiled in shadow. Between them, a thin pass opened, like a doorway carved by the sky itself. It was there the path led, winding higher, vanishing into the dark. The keeper lifted his lantern once more. The constellations within its glow shifted faintly, patterns turning as though in response to his steps. He did not look back again. His path was upward into the silence of the mountains, where the voices of the ancient pilgrims seemed to linger in the very stones. And with each step, the night deepened, carrying him further into the heart of the heights. Heart of the heights. The path wound upward until the desert was no more than a dim horizon, far below, swallowed in shadow. The mountains rose around him, their black ridges vast and solemn, as though they had stood watch since the first dawn. The air was sharp now, cool enough that each breath felt clean and thin, carrying nothing but stone and sky as the keeper stepped into the narrow pass. The lantern's glow brushed against walls that towered above him. Their surfaces were smooth, in places carved by winds that had scoured them for centuries, and jagged in others, as though the mountain had split itself open to reveal its raw bones. Shadows stretched long across the path, shifting gently as the lantern moved. Here, where the silence was unlike any he had known in the desert below. It was heavier, older, a silence that seemed to breathe with the stone itself. No voices stirred, no whispers of the lost. Even the wind seemed reluctant to enter, curling faintly at the edges of the pass, but never crossing its heart. He walked slowly, each footfall deliberate, the sound muted by the weight of stillness. The lantern's glow flickered faintly, though never dimmed, its soft light pressing outward into the dark. The constellations within its glass shifted, rearranging themselves into patterns that did not belong to the skies above, but seemed older, as though recalling maps of stars that no longer shone dot at intervals. He saw signs that the path had once been marked. A pillar leaning against the stone wall, half collapsed, yet still carved with faint symbols. A hollow cut into the rock, shaped to hold a flame that had long since gone out. These were not offerings, but guide traces left for pilgrims who had climbed here in ages past. Each one seemed to wake under the lantern's gaze, shadows of light tracing across their surfaces before fading back into stillness. The keeper paused at one such hollow, resting the lantern within it. For a moment, the stone around him brightened, as though remembering the fires it once held. The silence grew deeper, wrapping around him not as emptiness, but as presence. It was not absence of sound, but the listening of something vast, as if the mountain itself was aware, patient, waiting. He did not disturb it. He stood in stillness, the lantern glowing within the hollow, until the weight of that silence pressed gently against him like a hand laid on the shoulder. Then, lifting the lantern once more, he continued along the path. The pass wound upward, sometimes so narrow that he brushed against both walls at once, sometimes widening into stretches where the stars above appeared like rivers of light spilling across the sky. With each step, the silence grew heavier, yet it was not oppressive. It was the stillness of a place untouched, unbroken, a silence that carried memory rather than emptiness. And as the keeper walked deeper into it, the lantern burned steady, its glow guiding him through the heart of the mountains. Ahead, the pass began to open, revealing the faint outline of a plateau. What waited there, hidden in the embrace of stone and sky, was something even the old stories had forgotten. Asterisk, the narrow pass ended without warning. One moment, the keeper walked between walls of rock, so close they pressed the air into stillness. The next, the ground opened wide, and he stepped out onto a plateau that stretched beneath the night sky. The view was vast. Behind him, the path sank back into shadow, vanishing between the cliffs. Before him, the plateau spread out like a stone table set against the stars. At its far edge, the mountains lifted higher, their jagged crowns glowing faintly with silver light. Between them, carved into the face of the stone itself, stood the remains of a temple. It was not built with blocks nor raised by human hands. Its form was hewn directly from the mountain, its pillars shaped from living rock, its walls smooth by tools long since vanished. Time had broken much of it. Pillars cracked, archways collapsed, carvings worn into whispers, but enough remained to reveal its purpose. This was no dwelling. It was a place of devotion, a meeting between earth and sky. The keeper paused at the edge of the plateau. His lantern's glow spread across the stone, brushing faintly against the temple's face. The carving stirred, faint outlines appearing as though they had been waiting for a light to awaken them. He walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing softly against the vast emptiness. The pillars rose before him, worn but tall, their surfaces lined with star marks. Some had faded into dust, but others shone faintly under the lantern's glow, patterns that mirrored constellations overhead. The keeper raised the lantern higher, and the light reached across the carvings. For a moment, the stars above and the symbols below seemed to align, as if sky and stone were reflections of one another. He stepped into the shadow of the temple. The air grew cooler, touched with a faint scent of dust and stone. Inside, the floor was uneven, broken in places where time had split it. Yet, the shape of the chamber was still clear, great hall stretching inward, lined with niches where flames had once burned. At its center stood a basin carved from a single block of stone, wide and deep, though empty now. The keeper placed the lantern at its edge. Its glow spilled into the basin, filling it with soft radiance. For a heartbeat, the empty stone seemed to shimmer as though filled with liquid light, a reflection of the night sky pooling within its depth. Constellations formed and shifted there, circling slowly like stars in water. He stood in silence, watching. The mountain temple was not dead, was waiting. Every stone, every pillar, every carving leaned toward the lantern's glow, as though remembering the prayers once carried here, the songs once raised in devotion. Outside, the plateau lay still, yet the air felt different now, alive with presence. The stars above gleamed brighter, their light pressing down onto the stone. The keeper lifted the lantern again. Its glow did not dim, it pulsed, soft and steady, as though answering the mountain itself. He turned toward the far end of the hall, where steps carved into the rock led upward into darkness. The path continued, higher still, deeper into the heart of the mountain's devotion. And so he walked on, his lantern guiding the forgotten way. Asterisk, the steps rose steeply, cut straight into the mountain. Each one carried the keeper upward, his lantern swinging gently in rhythm with his breath. The stone was worn smooth, though the edges of the steps had crumbled here and there, as if countless feet had once climbed this way. The air grew cooler with every step. The stillness thickened until it felt as though he was walking not only into the mountain, but into time itself. The sound of his boots against stone echoed upward, returning in hushed tones, as though voices of the past still lingered in the walls. At the top, the stairway ended at a carved arch. Unlike the broken pillars outside, this arch was intact. Every inch of its surface was marked with lines and symbols, spirals, flowing curves, stars clustered in circles. Some were so faint they could barely be seen, but others glowed faintly as the lantern light touched them. Like embers long hidden in ash dot, the keeper stepped beneath the arch. His lantern revealed a vast chamber hollowed out of the mountain itself. The ceiling arched high above, its surface glittering faintly with shards of crystal embedded in the stone. Like a mirror of the night sky, columns rose to meet it, shaped as though they had grown naturally, though every one bore the careful hand of those who had worked them into beauty. In the center of the chamber lay a low platform of smooth stone, and upon it shallow bowls and vessels carved from obsidian and pale marble. They were empty now, but their arrangement spoke of ritual. Once, they might have held water from mountain springs, oil from desert plants, incense, or even dust gathered from the stars themselves. If such a thing could be touched, the keeper set his lantern upon the platform. Its light filled the room, sliding across the bowls, catching on the crystal ceiling until the chamber glowed as though stars themselves had descended into the mountain. As he stood in silence, he felt a shift in the air. The light did not simply reveal awakened. The bowls and vessels, empty as they seemed, began to catch the glow. Within them, faint glimmers stirred, like fireflies waking in the dark. The carvings on the walls grew clearer, telling fragments of a story. A people who watched the heavens, who brought offerings to honor the sky, who believed the stars held memory and guidance. The keeper's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm. He reached out, fingertips brushing the rim of a bowl. It was warm not with fire, but with something older, a quiet pulse that belonged neither to stone nor to air. It felt as if the vessel remembered every offering it had ever held. The chamber did not demand words. It asked only for presence. The keeper lowered his head in respect, not with the practiced formality of prayer, but with the quiet honesty of recognition. He was one among many, those who had come before, those who might one day return. From the far wall, a faint breeze stirred. It carried with it a whisper, soft and low, guiding his attention to another stairway, narrow and hidden behind one of the carved columns. It wound upward still, deeper into the mountain's heart. The keeper lifted his lantern once more. Its flame flickered, then steadied, as if it too wished to climb. And so he stepped toward the hidden stair, the sound of his footsteps folding into the silence of the chamber, as the mountain seemed to watch in patience. The stair behind the column was narrow, almost concealed, as though meant only for those who knew to look. The keeper turned sideways at points to fit, the walls pressing close on either side. His lantern painted the stone with fleeting patches of gold, its glow slipping ahead of him and then folding back into shadow. The climb was steep, spiraling upward, the sound of his breathing louder than his footsteps. From somewhere above came a faint sound like air moving through a hollow. It was not the howl of wind, but a gentler, steady sigh, as though the mountain itself drew breath. At last, the stair ended at a small archway, no higher than the keeper's shoulders. He ducked beneath it and stepped into a chamber unlike any he had seen before. It was not vast like the offering hall. It was smaller, more intimate, yet its presence filled the air with weight. The chamber was nearly round, carved with precision, its walls smooth and curving inward like the inside of a great dome. The ceiling was a single sweep of stone, unbroken except for hundreds of small holes piercing through it. Starlight streamed through those openings. Threads of silver and white cut down into the darkness, each one landing softly upon the chamber floor. They glowed not faintly, but with clarity, like thin spears of pure light. The lantern's flame joined them, but for the first time, it did not feel central. It was simply one light among many. The keeper stepped closer. where the beams of starlight touched the floor, symbols shimmered into being. Circles, spirals, lines that bent into constellations. They were not etched or carved. They were made of light itself, called into shape by the stars above. He crouched, letting his fingers pass across one. His hand met only cool stone, yet he felt a vibration, low and steady, humming through his bones. It was as if the mountain had become an instrument tuned to the heavens. The chamber was alive, not with voices of people, but with the presence of the sky itself. The stars did not simply shine above, they had descended here, their light woven into the heart of stone. The keeper's breath slowed. He let the silence take him, the stillness wrapping around his body like a cloak. In that moment, the journey across the desert, the ruins of the city, the temple carved in stone, all of it seemed like a path leading here, to this hidden heart. The light shifted subtly. The beams from the ceiling grew brighter, converging on the center of the chamber. Slowly, a single shape formed on the floor, a star. Unlike the others, brighter, sharper, pulsing with gentle rhythm. It was not a carving, not a reflection. It was alive. The keeper felt it before he fully saw it. A call, low and patient, reaching not for his ears, but for his chest. He lifted the lantern, and its glow bent, drawn toward the star of light. For a moment, the two flames, the human lantern and the celestial spark met. The chamber brightened, every beam of starlight flaring white, until it seemed the mountain itself had vanished, leaving only sky and silence. Then, as gently as it had awakened, the light eased back. The star on the floor pulsed once more, then steadied into stillness. As if waiting, the keeper lowered his lantern, but did not extinguish it. He knew this was no ending. This was a threshold. The chamber held its breath, as though asking a question without words. Asterisk, the keeper remained still, lantern in hand, the soft glow pressing gently against the silver beams that streamed through the dome. The star upon the floor continued to pulse, faint but steady, like a heartbeat carried across eternity. He listened. At first, there was only silence, the kind that filled ancient places, the weight of stone and time pressing against the ear. But slowly, beneath the hush, another sound began to form. It was faint, barely more than a vibration in the bones. Yet it carried the shape of something more. A hum, not random, not broken, but patterned, rising, falling, lingering. It was not music, not in a way humans knew, but it moved with rhythm, like breath. Each pulse of the star on the floor seemed to answer, each flicker of light syncing with the sound, until the chamber itself became an instrument of the heavens. The keeper set the lantern down and closed his eyes. He let the hum flow through him, not searching for meaning, only allowing it to touch him. The stone beneath his palms thrummed. The air in his chest resonated. He realized that Neat was not the mountain speaking, but the stars themselves. The chamber was built for listening. The holes in the dome, the beams of light, the perfect roundness of the stone, all of it had been shaped to carry the voices of the sky. What he heard now were not random echoes, but memories. Long waves of sound and silence stretched across centuries. The hum shifted, layering into tones, each thread weaving with the others. It was not language, but within it was shape, intent. The keeper felt not words, but impressions, endless desert of night, 1,000 lives looking upward, the memory of hands raising lanterns toward constellations, the weight of prayers carried into the silence above the lantern beside him flickered, answering. Its flame leaned into the rhythm as though it too recognized the call. The keeper opened his eyes and watched as the beams of starlight shifted. No longer scattered, they drew into patterns, lines forming across the chamber floor. Constellations unfurled like maps, then folded into others, and within them a single path began to take shape. It was faint, just a trail of light connecting points in an order the keeper had never seen before. It stretched outward, curving gently, its final mark glowing brighter than the rest. It was not a random cluster. It was a direction. The keeper's heart steadied. He understood now. This chamber was not only for remembering, it was for guiding. Those who had stood here before him had listened to the stars, not to worship blindly, but to hear their counsel, to follow where they pointed. The hum deepened, wrapping him in its resonance. His chest rose, his breath matching its rhythm, until it felt less like sound and more like heartbeat. Not just his own, but the heartbeat of the sky itself. The star on the floor pulsed brighter once more, then dimmed into steadiness, as if satisfied. The chamber grew still again, yet the impression remained within him. The direction, the calling, the sense of being part of something that reached beyond sand and stone. The keeper lifted his lantern. Its glow seemed steadier now, as though it too had heard and understood. He bowed his head, not to the stone, but to the silence between the stars. Then he turned toward the archway, for he knew the path was not finished. The desert awaited, and somewhere beyond its endless expanse lay the place the stars had shown, and he, lantern in hand, would follow. The keeper descended the hidden stair in silence, lantern steady at his side. The chamber's hum still lingered in his chest, a quiet resonance that had not faded with distance. It felt as though he carried more than light. Now he carried a fragment of the stars themselves. The offering hall lay quiet when he returned, its bowls and vessels resting in patient silence. The faint glimmers that had stirred before were gone, but their memory lingered like embers cooling in the ash. He bowed once, a simple gesture, before passing through the archway and stepping back into the great plateau. The sky had changed. Where before there had been endless night, now the horizon trembled with a pale line of gray. The stars were still bright overhead, but their sharpness was softening, as though they were retreating into distance. The mountains to the east glowed faintly, their peaks brushed with the earliest color of morning. The keeper paused. For so long, his journey had been guided by night, the desert under starlight, the ruins bathed in silver, the lantern answering the silence. Yet now the world was shifting, a reminder that even the longest nights bend toward dawn. He walked across the plateau, boots whispering over stone. The pillars of the temple rose behind him, growing smaller as he approached the narrow pass. He did not look back often, but once, at the edge, he turned. The mountain temple stood quiet, its stone walls pale in the dim light. To any other eye, it might have seemed broken, forgotten, but he knew better. He had seen its heart, heard its voice. It was not a ruin. It was a witness. The pass closed around him, shadows still thick between its walls. The lantern's glow stretched across the rock, warm and constant, as though unwilling to yield to morning. Step by step, he descended until the desert opened once more, vast and endless. The sand spread before him, still cloaked in shadow, though the eastern edge burned faintly with color, rose, amber, a whisper of gold. The air was cool, sharp with the bite of night not yet gone, but beneath it was a softness, a promise of warmth to come. The keeper stopped at the first dune. He set the lantern upon the sand, its light glowing steady in the half-dark. Then he lifted his eyes. The stars were fading, but the path he had seen in the chamber was not gone. It lived within him now, traced into his memory with a clarity sharper than any map. Each point, each line, each direction glowed behind his eyes. The horizon brightened. The first rim of the sun crested the mountains, spilling pale fire across the desert. The stars above dimmed further, bowing away, yet he did not feel abandoned. He felt carried forward, as though the night had placed something into the hands of Day. The keeper lifted the lantern once more. Its flame did not falter under the growing light. It burned, steady, quiet, patient, not to replace the sun, but to walk alongside it, to walk alongside it. He stepped into the sand, leaving the mountain behind. Each stride was firm, his shadow stretching long across the dunes. The desert had not changed, dunes still shifted. Its winds still whispered, but it felt different beneath his feet. Alive with direction. For the first time, he was not wandering. He was following, and the desert, endless as it was, seemed less vast. For, within its silence, now lay a path, hidden yet certain, waiting to be walked. Asterisk, the dunes unfolded before him, their ridges sharp and clean beneath the growing sun. The keeper walked with steady rhythm, lantern swinging at his side. Though the daylight made its glow faint, he did not extinguish it. The flame was more than light. Now it was memory. It was promise. It was the thread connecting night to day. The air shifted as the morning stretched upward. The coolness of dawn faded, replaced by heat rising from the sand. The sky was clear, unbroken, the pale blue of early morning hardening into brightness. Shadows shortened, edges sharpened, and the desert bared itself in full. The keeper's steps pressed into the dunes, leaving marks that the wind began to erase almost immediately. Each rise led to another, each hollow to another climb. The desert's silence deepened beneath the sun. No birds, no voices, no movement, but the breath of hot wind across the endless expanse. By midday, the horizon wavered. Heat rippled upward, bending light into shifting shapes. Pools of water shimmered where none existed, their edges glistening, calling with false promise. Far lines of shadow seemed to move like walls or towers, but when he approached, they vanished into nothing. The keeper paused atop one high dune. His breath was slow, measured. The mirages did not unsettle him. He knew the desert's tricks. It was the same land that had carried him under stars, the same silence that had opened to ruins and temple. The heat might bend vision, but not memory. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the chamber of starlight returned the beams, piercing stone. The constellation forming upon the floor, the single bright path curving toward its end. That map did not waver. It did not ripple. It remained as clear now as when he first saw it. When he opened his eyes again, the desert no longer felt empty. The horizon still shimmered, but his direction was fixed. He adjusted his course, setting his stride into the alignment of the memory, following not mirage, but the echo of stars. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning overhead. The keeper's shoulders bore its weight. His breath thickened in the heat, yet his pace remained steady. Each step fell with purpose. Each shadow of dune crossed with quiet strength. By late afternoon, the air softened slightly, the wind rising cool across the ridges. The keeper felt the strain ease, though his body carried the ache of distance. He paused once more, lantern held before him. In daylight, its flame was a small thing, barely visible against the sun's dominance. Yet, when he cupped his hand around it, the glow flickered strong and certain. He felt again that steady hum in his chest, the one the chamber had given him. And he knew he was still aligned with the path. The desert stretched on. Ahead, the horizon showed nothing but more sand, more sky, more silence. But the keeper's heart was calm, for within that silence lay a direction, unseen by any eyes but his own. The sun began to sink, its edge brushing the far dunes, and the first hint of shadow returned to the land. Soon the stars would rise again, and with them confirmation of the path. But even in the fading light, the keeper did not doubt. The desert tested him, but it had not broken him. The stars had given him a way forward, and he would follow it no matter how far the sands reached. Asterisk, the sun slipped low, its fire spilling across the dunes in a last sweep of gold before sinking behind the horizon. The desert darkened, its heat easing into the first cool breath of evening. Shadows stretched long across the sand, their edges softening until they melted into the coming night. The keeper paused atop a ridge. He set the lantern before him, shielding its flame against the wind. As twilight deepened, the lantern's glow grew bolder, no longer pale beneath the sun, but steady, alive, as though it had been waiting for the darkness to return. One by one, the stars reappeared. First faint, scattered pinpricks, then clearer, brighter, until the sky unfolded in its fullness. A dome of silver fire spread across the desert. The keeper tilted his head back, letting the sight rest upon him. After a day beneath the unbroken blue, the return of the stars felt like the return of 1,000 companions. He raised the lantern. Its flame swayed once, then steadied, as if answering the constellations above. The map he had seen in the mountain chamber glowed again in his memory, and he lifted his eyes to trace its lines across the living sky. And there it was, the same curve of stars, faint but certain, stretching in the direction he had been walking. It was no trick of memory. The chamber's guidance was true, drawn directly from the heavens. The keeper stepped forward, boots whispering softly across the cooling sand. The desert at night was not silent in the way it was by day. Small sounds stir the faint skitter of insects, the call of a night bird far in the distance, the sigh of wind weaving through ridges. Life moved unseen, subtle and quiet, as though the desert itself woke when the sun departed. With each step, the keeper felt less alone. The constellations above seemed to watch him. Their light falling not just upon the sand, but upon his shoulders, his lantern, his path. At times, the lantern's flame bent in rhythm with the stars, flickering when a new one broke through the horizon, as if both lantern and sky shared one breath. Hours passed. The night deepened, and the desert's surface grew silver under moonlight. Dunes shone like waves frozen in time, each ridge a crest, each hollow a trough. The desert transformed into an endless ocean of pale light. The keeper walked without haste, his steps slow and even, his breath calm. The hum within his chest, the resonance of the starlit chambermaid, it guided his stride, aligned his heart with the rhythm of the night. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps beside his own, soft impressions pressed into sand just beyond his lantern's reach. He never turned quickly to look. He did not need to. Whether real or imagined, the presence was not threatening. It felt familiar, as though the memory of those who had walked before him traveled still, their paths overlapping his own. When he finally rested, it was upon a low dune, the lantern set at his side. The stars arched overhead in silence, vast and endless. He lay back upon the sand, its cool surface cradling him. The scent of dust and salt carried by the breeze. His eyes half closed, but he did not fear sleep. The desert was not empty. The stars themselves were keeping watch. Asterisk, the keeper lay upon the dune, lantern steady at his side. Its glow pooled faintly across the sand, a soft circle of warmth against the vast cold of the desert night. Above him, the stars burned in their endless patterns, sharp and clear, the same constellations that had carried him since the ruins, since the mountain, since the chamber of light. Sleep did not come quickly. His breath slowed, his body eased, but his mind remained open, tuned to the hum still resonating from the mountain's heart. The silence pressed around him, gentle but heavy, until it seemed the desert itself was leaning closer, listening to the rhythm of his chest. When sleep finally touched him, it was not the sudden drift of exhaustion. It was more like a threshold, a quiet doorway he stepped through, guided not by his own will, but by the night itself. He found himself standing again, though his body had not moved. The desert stretched before him, but changed. The dunes glowed faintly, as if lit from within, each one etched in silver. The sky above was not only filled with stars, but alive with them. They shifted slowly, lines bending, constellations reshaping. Flowing like water, the keeper held no lantern now, yet he glowed faintly, as if the starlight itself recognized him. A figure emerged ahead, not solid, but woven from light, tall and still, its form more suggestion than flesh. It stood with the weight of ages, its presence neither man nor woman, but both and neither. A voice came, though the figure's mouth did not move. You have carried the flame. You have walked the silence. You have listened. The keeper bowed his head, not in fear, but in respect. The dream did not feel strange, felt like a continuation of the chamber, as though the stars had only waited until he rested to speak more clearly. The figure lifted an arm, and the sky above rippled. The constellations bent again, their lines forming shapes he had never seen before. Great rivers of light flowed across the heavens, paths and crossings, circles and spirals. Some faded, some blazed, but one remained steady. The same path he had been shown in the chamber. The figure's voice deepened, carrying weight. This is not your journey alone. Others have walked. Others will walk. You carry the flame not for yourself, but for those who come after. But for those who come after. The keeper lifted his eyes. The path in the sky shone brighter now, its end glowing like a beacon far beyond the horizon. He felt both small and vast at once, a single man in endless sands, yet also a thread woven into something immeasurably greater. The figure lowered its arm. The dunes flickered. The stars bent inward. And the dream dissolved into brightness, soft. When the keeper opened his eyes, the desert was quiet again. The lantern still burned at his side, steady as ever. The stars above were unchanged, fixed in their constellations, silent, and yet his chest carried the echo of the vision. The voice still folded within his breath. The dream had not been dream alone. It had been memory. It had been instruction. It had been the stars, speaking more directly than ever before. The keeper sat up slowly, his shadow stretching long across the sand. Dawn was still far, but he no longer felt the weight of night as he had before. The silence was full. The path ahead was brighter. He lifted the lantern, and its glow flared once, as though agreeing. The desert was wide, the journey long. But the keeper was not walking alone. Asterisk when the horizon softened into the first pale thread of dawn. The keeper rose from the sand. His limbs ached gently, but his spirit carried no heaviness. The dream had left something within him that did not fade with waking. The air itself seemed different, charged with a quiet presence, as though the desert had drawn closer in recognition. The lantern still burned, though its light was faint now against the gray of morning. He lifted it, feeling its weight steadier than before, almost as if the night's vision had settled deeper into its core. The flame leaned slightly, waiting. The keeper turned his eyes eastward toward the line of dunes where light was spreading. He began to walk, each step steady, his breath slow. The sand cool beneath his sandals before the sun's rise would harden it again. The desert stretched endless, but not empty. As the light grew, shapes began to emerge, subtle at first. Then, clearer dot along the rise of a dune, he saw stones arranged, not by chance, but by hands long gone. Half buried, weathered, yet still forming a faint line. The keeper stopped, tracing the curve with his gaze. It bent forward, then vanished beneath the sand. Pointing toward the deeper desert, he walked closer, brushing sand from one stone. Its surface bore no carvings now, only the scars of wind. Yet its position was deliberate. It was a marker, a guide. The keeper knelt, pressing his palm against it. The stone was cool. But when his skin lingered, he felt a warmth rising, not from himself, but from something preserved within. A memory, a trace of those who had walked before. He closed his eyes. In the stillness, faint sounds stirred within his mind footsteps. The creak of leather straps, the whisper of voices carried on wind. The desert was not silent here. It remembered. When he opened his eyes, the stone seemed to gleam faintly before dulling again. He rose, following where the line pointed. Soon, more signs appeared. A broken shard of clay, half buried in sand. A fragment of wood, smoothed by time, yet still holding shape. Even the faintest outline of a path across a ridge. Not carved by wind, but pressed long ago by travelers, whose feet had carried the same burden. The keeper's chest tightened not with fear, but with recognition. The dream had not been only vision. The stars had shown him truth. Others had walked, carrying light, guided by silence. And though the desert had swallowed much, it had not swallowed everything. He paused on the crest of a dune as the sun finally broke the horizon. Its rays spilled across the sands, igniting them into gold. Shadows stretched long, and in their reach he saw more than just dunes. He saw a pattern, faint but clear, like the remains of a road veiled in light. The keeper lifted the lantern. Its flame caught the morning sun, glimmering like a star held in his hand. He whispered softly, voice barely more than breath. Not alone. Following the forgotten trail into the deep heart of the desert, where silence waited, where memory lingered, and where the stars would one day open again. Asterisk, by midday the sun had sharpened, beating fiercely across the open sands. The keeper's robe clung damp to his back. His skin stung with salt, yet his pace did not falter. The stones, the shards, the faint lines of a path, they continued to rise before him, scattered across the dunes like fragments of a memory refusing to vanish. Hours passed, and then, just as heat shimmered across the horizon, something shifted. The desert's shape broke. A hollow appeared where no hollow should be, a depression at the base of two leaning ridges. From afar, it seemed a trick of light, but as he drew closer, he saw it was real, a pocket of shade, a place where sand had sunk lower than the land around it. He descended carefully, the slope sliding beneath his feet. At the hollow center, half buried beneath centuries of wind, rose a curve of stone. Not rough, not wild, but cut. The keeper brushed sand aside with his hands. Each sweep revealed more smooth edges, the outline of an arch, fragments of carving, worn thin, but still discernible. Symbols curved across the surface circles, stars, lines of connection. The same shapes he had seen glowing in the chamber of the mountain. His breath caught. It was no ruin by chance. It was a sanctuary. The lantern in his hand flickered, flame straining forward, as though eager, urging him closer. He pressed his palm against the stone arch. The surface was warm, but not with the heat of the sun. It pulsed faintly, like a heart deep within the desert, still alive after uncounted years. A gap yawned where part of the arch had collapsed, leading downward into shadow. The keeper lit the space with his lantern and stepped inside. Cool air embraced him, a relief after the burning outside. The passage was narrow, the walls close, but the deeper he moved, the wider it grew. Sand crunched beneath his boots, though much of the floor had hardened into stone tiles. His lantern's glow revealed remnants, carvings, faded murals, fragments of pottery, signs of hands that had once lived, once prayed, once gathered here. Then the passage opened fully. A chamber stretched before him. The air smelled of dust and age, yet it carried something gentler too, a faint sweetness, like dried herbs lingering from long ago. Around the edges of the chamber were alcoves, each holding fragments of what had once been lamps or vessels. Some lay shattered, but others remained whole, their shapes echoing the lantern in his hand. At the chamber's center rose a pedestal of carved stone. Upon it rested a shallow bowl, its surface covered in sand. The keeper approached, brushing it clear. Beneath, etched into the bowl, was a constellation, a circle of stars connected by fine lines, a pattern he recognized from the night sky. The lantern's flame swelled, burning brighter until the faint carvings around the chamber walls seemed to shimmer. The constellations above echoed in stone. For a breathless moment, the chamber felt alive again. Not empty, but waiting. The keeper sank to his knees before the pedestal. His hands trembled, yet not from weakness, from recognition. Others had come here, as he had. Others had carried light. The sanctuary was not forgotten. It was remembering him. Asterisk, the keeper's breath slowed as he stared at the shallow bowl. The carvings within it glimmered faintly, though no light touched them. His lantern pulsed in his hand, the flame leaning, swaying. Eagers, though it knew the place better than he did. He hesitated. The silence in the chamber was deep, ancient, pressing against his ears. Yet beneath it, he felt something else, an invitation. Not a command, not a demand. Awaiting, slowly, he lifted the lantern with both hands. Its metal frame was warm, almost alive, the glass glowing faintly. He lowered it toward the pedestal. The closer it came, the brighter the flame burned, until its glow spilled across the carved constellation like water spilling into dry channels. When the lantern touched the bowl, the flame did not flicker. It steadied, rooted, as though it had found home. The chamber breathed. The carvings in the bowl lit from within. Lines of light running outward in all directions. The stars etched into the walls shimmered one by one, until the entire chamber was painted in constellations above, around, beneath. A universe recreated in stone and glow. The keeper stepped back, eyes wide. His chest vibrated with the same resonance he had felt in the mountain chamber. But here, it was stronger, fuller, rising through his bones like the echo of 1,000 voices. Then came the sound. It began as a low hum, soft and steady, vibrating in the stone floor beneath his feet. The pillars trembled, not with collapse, but with awakening. From the alcoves, faint threads of light unraveled, drifting into the air like mist. They curled, gathered, then stretched upward, becoming shapes, figures, not solid, not of flesh, but outlines of light, tall, robed, some carrying lanterns of their own. Their faces were indistinct, but the weight of their presence pressed upon the keeper's chest, not crushing, not heavy with judgment, but filled with calm gravity, filled with calm gravity. They stood around the chamber, silent, luminous, watching. The lantern on the pedestal flared once, and the hum grew into tone, rising and falling like music with no instrument. The figures bowed their heads. The keeper fell to his knees, not from fear, but from something deeper, reverence. His hand pressed to the floor, feeling the rhythm vibrate through the stone. His mind blurred, his breath slowed. The flame's glow filled his vision until the chamber itself seemed to dissolve, leaving only the stars. And then he heard it, not a voice carried on air, but a voice within, woven through his thoughts like wind through branches. You are not the first. You are not the last. You are part of the chain, keeper. The flame you carry is not yours alone. It belongs to the desert, to the stars, to those who walked before and those who will walk after. Guard it, walk with it, and when the silence calls, answer. The words left no sound behind, but their echo remained deeper than memory. The keeper's eyes burned with quiet tears. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the cool stone, letting the truth settle within him. When he raised his head, the luminous figures were already fading, the light thinning back into mist. The hum softened, fading into stillness. Only the lantern remained. Glowing steady upon the pedestal, the sanctuary had spoken. Asterisk, the chamber was quiet once more. The glow that had filled every wall, every line of stone, had faded back into shadow. Dust settled slowly in the air, floating in the afterbreath of something vast. The keeper remained on his knees for a long time, listening not for sound, but for what lingered in silence. His chest still trembled with the words that were not words, the message that had seeped into his very bones. He could not unhear it. He could not unknow it. At last, his eyes lifted to the pedestal. The lantern burned steadily, its flame taller than before, its glow richer, deeper, as though it no longer shone for him alone. The light felt layered, woven from countless others. He rose to his feet. His body ached with weariness, but his hands were steady as he reached forward. Slowly, he lifted the lantern from the bowl. The moment his fingers closed around it, heat rushed through his arms. Not searing, not painful, but immense, like holding sunlight itself. His vision blurred. For an instant, the chamber disappeared, and in its place, he saw a woman walking across the dunes, lantern in hand, her eyes fixed on the stars. A man kneeling in the same chamber, centuries ago, bowing before the same pedestal. Children gathered in a hidden alcove, the lantern's glow keeping them safe while storms raged outside. A lone traveler lost in darkness, the flame guiding him to water. Hands upon hands, generation after generation, carrying, guarding, passing the light forward. The keeper gasped, staggering. The visions cascaded, countless and unbroken. Each life was a thread, and a lantern was the loom holding them together. He sank to his knees once more, clutching the lantern close. Tears slipped down his cheeks, though his lips did not tremble. It was not sorrow. It was the weight of memory, the gravity of belonging to something greater than himself. When the flood of visions eased, he opened his eyes. The chamber returned around him, dim and still. Yet the lantern's flame did not dim. It glowed brighter now, not just gold, but edged in pale silver, as though starlight itself had fused with fire. The keeper rose again, slower this time. He looked toward the chamber's exit, the narrow passage that led back into the desert. Beyond it, he knew the dunes waited, endless and shifting. But now, he also knew this. He would not step into them empty. The lantern was no longer only a guide. It was a memory, a burden, a promise. He tightened his grip around its handle. "Not mine alone," he whispered, voice steady. And with that, he turned toward the passage, ready to carry the light back into the waiting desert, where silence and stars would once again test his strength. Asterisk, the passage gave way to blinding light. The keeper stepped from the sanctuary into the open desert once more. The sun already sinking low. He shielded his eyes, letting them adjust. Then lifted the lantern. Its flame burned steady despite the wind. Brighter now than any fire he had carried before. Gold threaded with silver, it glowed with a depth that seemed to answer the vastness around him. The desert no longer felt empty. Every grain of sand, every ridge of dune seemed to lean toward the light. Listening, he descended the slope, boots pressing into soft sand. Behind him, the hollow where the sanctuary lay already began to blur, filling with shadow. Soon, wind would cover its entrance again, burying it from all but those meant to find it. But the lantern carried its truth forward. The desert stretched ahead, endless, but his steps were no longer uncertain. He walked with the calm rhythm of one who had joined a path older than himself. Each breath matched the slow rise and fall of the land. Each heartbeat echoing with the tone he had heard in the chamber. Night gathered. The last rim of sun slid beneath the horizon, leaving the sky deepening into indigo. The first stars flickered awake, scattered at first, then swelling into constellations. The keeper paused on the crest of a dune. He held the lantern high. Its flame pulsed once, twice, then steadied, brighter than before. And the stars answered. They shimmered more intensely, their light sharpening as though leaning closer. Constellations shifted ever so slightly, bending their lines toward the lantern's glow. For a breathless moment, sky and flame were one, each recognizing the other. The keeper felt it in his bones. He was not only carrying light, he was carrying memory, promise, and connection. The flame was a bridge between past and present, between silence and stars, between himself and those who would come after. He lowered the lantern, pressing it close to his chest. His lips moved, no louder than a murmur. "I will carry it." The desert wind curled around him, cool and gentle, lifting grains of sand in soft spirals that caught the silver edge of starlight. The sound was almost like a sigh or a blessing. The keeper turned, beginning his walk once more. His path led deeper into the dunes, where silence waited where the night spread wide, where no end could be seen. And yet, step by step, the journey did not feel lonely, for above him, the stars kept watch, and within his hand, the lantern answered them, steady, unbroken, alive, alive.